Hello and welcome to The Pledge. Now, as everyone knows, absolutely nothing happened this week, except for the weather. A lot of weather. The so-called beast from the east arrived in Britain. A Siberian cold snap which closed schools, blocked roads and cancelled trains. It wasn't fun and you know it, so don't expect any snow-related puns or unbridled infantile joy. Expect a proper, grown-up, rational response of misery and frustration, you bunch of snowflakes. So how about a bit of fiery debate to warm you up? Coming up on the show this week, Nick ticks a scandal which has been dubbed the next MP's expenses. Majid gets personal. Karen says the single market has the way forward, and June thinks life, not tax, should begin at 40. But first, me. I want to talk about the proposed law for an opt-out system of organ donation. If passed, it means everyone will become a donor, and the state will take control of what happens to your body unless you explicitly instruct it not to. But the whole point of organ donation is that it's just that, a donation, a gift, arguably the greatest gift one human being can give to another. If it isn't volunteered, it isn't a gift. Sorry, but I don't want my organs to be state-owned. What happens to them should be my decision or my family's. Currently, there's little evidence the opt-out system would improve the chances of those awaiting organs. In Wales, where it already exists, the number of transplants has actually dropped. And why should people who feel queasy about giving their organs, or those whose religions forbid it, be made to feel selfish, like they don't care about saving people's lives? We absolutely should campaign and encourage more people to give their organs. But the state requisitioning of our bodies is wrong. No one should have to opt out of state control. An individual's rights and their choice has to be the default position.
Well, with your debate, Carol, I don't see why you're so incensed about this, because for a lot of people who, as you quite rightly mentioned, whose religion forbids it or for whatever reason don't want to donate their organs, then they would be the type that would actually opt out. I think there are a lot of people that actually would like to donate their organs and just don't get round to it. So this is a way of ensuring that that doesn't happen.
But the principle
I'm more than happy for
the principle is wrong. You should not have to opt out of state control. You know,
how is that?
This extends to me. This extends
saving lives.
Well, let me. No, there you go. You're doing it already. You're making people. There's this presumed guilt that people will have if they don't give over their organs. The phrase that they're using now is presumed consent. Now, presumed consent is no consent at all, because being unaware of the law, which many people will be if this is passed, it means that the state can then just requisition your body. And I think this is a really personal thing. And frankly, I don't trust the state to handle this right. I really don't. You know, death is should be very respectful. It should be a very sensitive thing. And I don't trust the state to handle it in that way. And I'll just say two words to you: Alder Hey Hospital. Do you remember what happened back there in the 90s?
But that was still the minority.
It was not the minority. No, June. Let me make it clear. It was not the minority. The organs of 850 babies were taken. Some parents gave permission. Most did not. But it was discovered in the public inquiry into Alder Hey that many NHS hospitals were taking organs without permission.
That's completely different to having a system where people opt out. And it shows, I mean, the British Heart Foundation have surveyed people, and they say 75% of the British public would actually prefer an opt-out system and would go for it. And the reality is that the thousands of people who are waiting for transplants and the supply of organs is almost 50%. There's a huge shortage. In fact, my wife's, one of her best friends, has gone to America for a heart transplant because she's got to wait so long over here and she may not survive. And also the other aspect is the Asian community. The Asian community, there's a big shortage of organs there. And the ethnic minority in general.
Yeah.
Because so I think if it can save even 500 lives, it's worth it.
A guy called Professor Chris Rudge, who I'm sure you've heard of, he used to be in charge of the transplant organisation for the NHS and has been a transplant surgeon for years. He's incensed at this. He does not want this to happen because he is saying it should be a gift, and he is saying that if this is passed, he will opt out, as will a lot of his family.
Can I say something?
No, but the thing is, June, you're presuming everyone knows the law, will know the law.
What I don't understand for the life of me with this debate is that when you die, when somebody dies, their organs don't belong to them. They rot
Yes, they do.
in the mud.
They
and
belong
the
to
insects
them.
eat them. No, but what happens to them?
But
is
they belong to them.
No, you're dead. You don't own anything when you're dead. You don't own anything. You're dead. And you go into the dust, and then the insects in that dust eat your rotting organs. That's literally what happens to them. Now, in that situation, when a little young girl, such as Izzy Sewell, has this to say, and we'll show you a clip.
Okay.
I don't understand in any moral or ethical viewpoint how we would deny somebody like this the chance to have a better quality of life when what's going to happen to my organs is they are literally going to rot in the mud.
That's one of the
let's
arguments
listen
around
to
people, anyway.
Izzy, see what she has to say.
Been on the waiting list for 8 to 9 months, maybe longer. Can't do anything, I can't go and do my career because it could be any time and that's going to put my life on hold when that happens. Just want it to be as soon as possible so I can get on with my life really and start going on holidays. Whenever my phone rings, I feel like it's going to be a transplant.
So that's a young lady there expressing the misery that she, even when a phone rings and her heart jumps because she just wants to resume normal life again. Now, if I'm going to deprive people of a quality of life because I've got some notion that, whether it be religious or superstitious, that something happens to me after I die, and surely that conflicts with another religious notion that you'd want to help people.
Okay.
Save lives.
So
Last thing I'll say. You mentioned Wales.
Okay.
Last thing I'll say. In
Yeah,
Wales,
it hasn't worked.
Well, one of the reasons we can't really use those statistics is A, it hasn't been running long enough, and B,
2 years.
Yeah, not long enough.
2 years.
Not long enough. And B, because we're the UK, where organ donation is presumed to be opt-in unless you proactively opt out in Wales, those organs are going to...
Karen, I'm going to bring you in, Karen, in 1 second, but I will bring Karen in 1 second. What I want to say is that in Brazil, where this was brought in, they had to repeal the law because organ donations dropped. In France, donations dropped because people were revulsed by the thought.
On the other hand, if you look at the list of the numbers per million, where they're the highest donors, the top 5 are all opt-out countries, and we're way below that. The other point about this film that we've just seen, it's called Max's Law. We're putting it through Parliament.
Yes.
That 9-year-old boy, if you read the letter that his parents wrote to thank the family of the
Karen,
donor, that is so touching.
Max got his organ under the current system.
Carol,
That's not...
Carol,
let's bring Nick in.
Then I have a quote that I'd like to read out.
Okay. This is very personal for me because on May the 11th night, and if you've listened to me on the radio or read me in my column, you'll know about my brother Simon, who you probably knew, he was a newspaper reporter. So on the May the 11th, 1968, my brother was a rear seat passenger in a horrific road accident and he was raced to hospital in southeast London, and when my parents got there, they were told he was dead and that they wanted his organs. My mother resisted, as did my father, and sorry to use the language of the time, but they were told he would just be a vegetable, he'll never have any quality of life, he'll just sit in a mold, and my parents said, well, whatever it is. He was unconscious until August the 31st. Those dates are still seared into my mind, I remember it very vividly. And he went on to have a full... So having wanted his organs, he went on to have a full recovery, and he enjoyed life for 34 years as a reporter on the Daily Mirror. He died 16 years ago, this week, actually, earlier this month. That's my brother Simon. Now, what does that tell me? That tells me that if I wanted a kidney, I would want the law that Karen and his colleagues are working. But it also tells me that you have to be very, very careful. And without dwelling on it too much, there was an excellent point made by the columnist in The Sun, Jane Moore, who talked about her father, who has died as well, and he wanted to leave his body. And so they were ready, because what happens, I understand, is that, and I answer, surgeons and clinicians at the moment of passing start coming around with clipboards and doing tests to see how good my kidneys might be. Now, if you're in a position that you've had your conversation with dad or mum, then that's not going to be so disturbing. If you are coming, as we probably all have, sat round a bedside with losing a relative, I would argue that the last thing you need is someone coming up and taking the hand of your dad or trying to see what his organ... So I see what your colleagues are trying to do. I know you need to bring something in. Let me just say that this is a horrific statistic. I heard your numbers, Karen. Let's just take a look. There are 470 people, that's 470 people on the transplant waiting list who died last year. That's from NHS organ donation. Yes, everything needs to be done to address that, but you have to be aware of cases like my brother Simon, and you have to be aware of the sensitivities of those patients' relatives.
And thank you for sharing your story with us, Nick. The whole issue with this is that they would make sure that the patients were actually dead before...
Well, they said my brother was, but...
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can't trust the people...
I mean, they did it for the right reasons.
The people in France and Brazil didn't want to do this because they didn't trust
Did
them.
they say he was dead, or did they say he was in a
They said he would
comatose
die.
state?
They said he would die.
He would die. die.
Yeah.
So
Right,
with this,
I think what
they
Julian's
have
saying is
to be
once they're
dead
actually dead.
when they are
Yeah.
actually dead.
Yeah.
Okay, so this quote comes from Joe Ball, whose 9-year-old daughter Kira was killed in a car crash. He says, "My daughter gave her heart to Max. She gave a gentleman in his 30s on the waiting list for 2.5 years, got a kidney. A lady in her 50s got her other kidney. She had been waiting 9.5 years.
Wow.
Her pancreas and liver went to another little boy. She helped to save 4 lives. She lives on.
Wow.
And that gives us great comfort now. I believe organ donation can make such a difference. If you can help others with your organs, when your organs are no good to you anymore, then why wouldn't you?"
You know, June, when I knew I was going to talk about this subject, I went back and read some accounts of people who have had organ transplants. I read accounts from parents whose children have had organ transplants.
And this is
well, let me
this
finish.
is her who inspired Max's
only
law.
one of the accounts that I read said it should be compulsory, this opt-out is, and the rest of them said that people who receive these organs, they have to know that the people giving them were willing to give, and that was the great gift for them. That made, and there's a girl called Ellie Lacey, you've all heard people say, who was 2 days from death. She had a liver transplant. She said words couldn't express her gratitude for the person who had given, but it was very important for her to know that that organ was given willingly. And I think Nick is right. You know, we can't trust the state necessarily to handle this right. In the past, they've proved they've done it wrong. But I still think it's a principle here that state control of your body isn't right. You know, it's the individual's choice. And that has to be the default position. If you say you want to give your organs, that's fine. But if you don't, and what happens if you change your mind? What happens if you're 6 months before you die, you change your mind? You don't know how to do it.
Well, from a matter of certain life and death to something perhaps not as serious. Roll up for the chance to ride what must be one of the juiciest gravy trains ever. You'll enjoy a 6-figure salary, expenses beyond the dreams of the whizziest of city whiz kids or even Karan, and in some instances, free accommodation. You'll only ever fly first or business class, travel by limousine, and stay in the world's finest hotels. And you won't pay. Oh, have I mentioned? Judging by league tables, you don't even have to be any damn good at your job. Such is the lifestyle enjoyed by scores of university vice-chancellors. Now, paying big bucks to the bosses of universities such as Oxford and Cambridge, that makes sense. I get that. They're globally renowned institutions. But many of the others are locked in the performance table's relegation zone. All this funded by our children forking out nearly £10,000 a year in fees. Well, you don't need a university degree to work out that this well-remunerated lunacy needs to stop.
Wow.
This has become a huge issue.
Doing my best, Karen, yes, I'm doing
Particularly, my colleague Lord Adonis has been...
Yes.
He's got a bee in his bonnet about this. And you can understand where people say they're earning a lot of money. Well, let's put it in perspective. A university vice-chancellor of a leading Russell Group university, for example, you've got tens of thousands of students, sometimes over 30,000 students. You've got thousands of staff. You've got a turnover, in many cases, approaching £1 billion. In the case of Oxford and Cambridge, billions of pounds.
I'll give you those two.
You've got infrastructure projects running into hundreds of millions of pounds. Huge responsibilities. And then you're told you're getting paid too much. And these are not public sector institutions. I mean, in the case of Oxford or Cambridge, less than a quarter of their funds come from the government. Even the pension scheme is not a government pension scheme. That's also become a big topic. So you put it all into context, and I compared with a FTSE 100 chief executive who gets paid, on average, 10 times what a university vice-chancellor gets paid.
Or a radio
and I think
broadcaster.
we want our universities to be the best in the world, along with the United States of America, which they are, and I'm proud of that. Well, we've got to have the best people leading those
Yes.
universities. And in the global market, by the way,
Exactly.
our vice-chancellors
That's the
get
point.
paid
I don't-
a
Yeah, but that's
fraction.
the
They get
point.
paid a fraction, for example, of what American vice-chancellor, equivalent vice-chancellor in America, even Australia, they get paid much higher than we. So we've got to attract the best talent for our students.
In a moment. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to counter that, but Carol.
Okay, so you say, you say it's justifiable. If it was so justifiable,
in the backup,
why have they tried to keep it a secret? Because the point is they did try to keep it a secret. The information that was released...
What a secret?
Their salaries.
Their salaries.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they did.
Transparent.
Well, let me finish. The information that was
didn't
released
reply.
in the dispatches programme had to be got through a series of freedom of information requests, which finally got through. Now, what I hadn't realised, Nick, and I don't know whether you had...
But what's wrong with that?
Well, sorry, keeping it secret.
They're not public servants.
Doesn't matter. They're being paid. They're being
No,
paid.
I think it should be transparent.
Can I just finish my point? What I hadn't realised was that the remuneration committees that decide the pay and perks of these vice-chancellors, I thought they were totally independent. Well, they're not totally independent because a lot of these vice-chancellors sit on those committees. 45% of them are members of those committees. So you're sitting in a committee that's talking about your pay. What do you say? Do you just tell them what you want and they pass it?
No, and to this point, a lot of them, they're not on the committee. It should be completely independently
Nearly
decided
50% of them
by
are.
the council of
they
the
can all
university,
attend the meetings,
by a
Karen.
remuneration committee. And I know
can
from
all
personal
attend the
experience,
meetings.
they are very happy to pay whatever the vice-chancellor will be paid because they think it's excellent value for the university.
Everybody's looking at me at once. I'm going to go to June. Sorry, Majid.
That's okay.
Well, first of all, Nick, I trust you to be elitist again when it comes to this, because it's funny how you're totally happy with Oxford and Cambridge to get the money,
Because
but
of
you
their
don't
global-
want
because of their
you don't
global,
want everybody else
position.
to it. The point is, you need the best people, and the university. Well, let me finish. A university vice chancellor's role is a very unique role. You need a very broad skill set. You need to be able to fundraise. You need to understand education. You're effectively a business person and an academic, so you can't expect them not to get what they deserve, what they would get in the corporate sector.
In some instances, they're bottom.
Way less than.
They're bottom of the table and they're making 200 grand a year.
That's not the point.
The best people,
But
what would the worst be
But
like?
how many students are at that university? That's still a big infrastructure to oversee.
That's not doing very well.
Well, I was astounded when I saw that you were going to discuss this topic, because I thought, hang on a minute, Nick Ferrari's gone all left-wing, arguing for pay caps, and these aren't even public servants, right? And one thing we know is, at the end of the day, right, what we know is that, as you've said, Karen, in America, they're on millions of dollars.
I'm not too worried about them.
Millions of
My
dollars.
kids aren't paying those fees.
Our vice-chancellors will go elsewhere.
Well, the vice-chancellor of Oxford went... Andrew Hamilton, who was a Cambridge person, became vice-chancellor of Oxford, is now heading New York University. NYU, earning much more.
10 times more.
Let's get Majid didn't quite finish
I have a
his point.
question, but before the question for you, I'm going all radio on you, Nick, right? But before the question, we're going to hear what the Vice-Chancellor for Sheffield Hallam University, Professor Chris Husbands, had to say for himself.
OK.
I applied for a job, I was offered the salary, I've never tried to negotiate it up, I've never accepted either in this job or my last head of institution job a bonus. I think I'm paid to do a good job, and if I do a good job, I'm doing my job properly. I don't have any housing perks, and it's really important to me that I can look my students in the eye and my staff in the eye, and I think on that basis I can.
Now, Nick, I'm assuming you don't believe in caps on pay,
No,
right? Because you're not
absolutely not. No, pay on performance.
Yes, now, so if you applied for that job, here's my question. If you applied for...
So I'm staggered, June gets paid.
So, Professor Husbands...
We paid more than you.
If you Professor Husbands, when applying for that job, so he did not negotiate it up, right? So if you were him and you applied for that job and you were offered £350,000 a year, what would you do?
Well, I'm not in that field, but I'd probably take it. But it's not quite the point.
We are.
I want to bring... Karen in a minute. I want to get Karen in. Now, Karen, among many of your... International businessman, right? Famous Cambridge debater, Mr. Universe 1965, among your many job titles. You're also in education, in a way. You're Chancellor of which university?
University of Birmingham.
And how much do you pay your Vice-Chancellor?
He's paid
£426,000.
And you're ranked 18th in the country.
That's not bad.
No,
That's quite a lot of
just let's put
universities.
this in perspective. That has been, the council of the university has approved that unanimously. In fact, they gave him a resounding applause and thanked him for what he's doing for the university. Why? The university is a Russell Group university.
Indeed.
It's ranked one of the top 15 in the country. It's ranked one of the top 100 in the world. It's consistently done incredibly well. It's financially doing very well.
Carol,
It's
what is-
investing hundreds of £1 million of infrastructure for the benefit of the students. He's
And
doing a
the
great
local
job as a
What is
leader.
the
community.
And
excuse
the
for these
impact in
guys?
the local community.
What is the
Yes.
excuse for these
Billions
guys
of pounds being put
charging
back into the
Let Karen
expensive?
finish. Let Karen finish. Carol.
If we're putting billions of pounds back into the economy, and it's thanks to a good leader,
Right.
any good institution has a good leader,
So
I
tell
am
me,
very grateful
why
to what
is
he's
someone
doing.
who is on 350 grand a year already, or 450 grand a year in many of the cases, why are these people on expenses where they're claiming stuff like Easter eggs, like scented
Yes.
candles, like silver salvers, like hampers from Fortnum?
Not Professor Sir
They're
David
doing-
Eastwood, we need
yes,
to say.
They're
Go on.
doing, they're doing
Paul
all of this. Can I finish?
Martini.
They're doing all of this. Yes, exactly. Whatever the heck. Whatever the hell that is. All of this.
Not the
on
way I do it, it's not.
It's a cocktail.
All of this on the backs
Can
of
I explain
hard...
why?
No, can I just
Yeah.
finish?
Yeah.
All of this on the backs of hard-pressed students. They're using huge
Here's-
chunks of
here's why.
student fees to fund this. They also get free houses, Karen. Most of their houses, they're living in houses,
Okay.
£1 million and a half quid. They get those rent-free as well.
Let's hear from Karen.
So, whatever the facilities you provide a top quality vice chancellor, as long as they are appropriate to the job that he's doing,
Is it
and he or she
appropriate?
is successful.
Is that
in our
appropriate?
case,
Yes.
in our case, he's very successful, and I think he deserves everything that he gets. And he's doing a brilliant job leading a university to the benefit of our students, to the benefit of Birmingham, and to the benefit of the country.
I don't need to
And
read out
the
the statement.
world.
He's done far better than the
Right.
statement. You've done it much better, I tell you.
I'd say paying £12 or £15 for a Paul Martini, which is a cocktail, by the way, folks.
Yeah,
A cocktail
that's-
for a pledge of £1 million donation to university is an investment worth.
Yes.
This
Scandal.
is worse
That's
what
than
I'd
the
say.
MP
Right.
said.
Scandal.
This
However,
is worse than the MP said.
talking about cutting
Worse.
pay, we've got to move on to cutting other things now,
Oh, dear.
right? Because anti-male circumcision groups, bolstered by proposals to ban the ritual for boys in Iceland, hope to pressure the British Medical Association to condemn the practice in Britain. Roughly 4% of boys born here are circumcised. The BMA outlines best practice, but takes no position on whether the non-medical ritual is ethical. Senior rabbis and imams have said that a move to ban the practice contravenes their religious freedom. I used to unreservedly support this right, but having since researched it, and despite the serious religious taboos around me saying so, I became unable to justify removing someone else's body parts without their consent, especially without any medical grounds. As a Muslim who's been circumcised, I'm no longer convinced the religious freedom argument holds. Circumcision is imposed as the parent's religious choice on their baby. The boy is given no say. As such, it is the exact opposite of religious freedom. Now, as painful as it is, for me and others to adapt our cultural identity, I think it's time we raise the age of consent for circumcision to 16.
Okay. I actually think circumcision is an act of faith. I think for Jewish people, it's a non-negotiable part of their identity. Arguably, it's an essential part of Judaism. And you mentioned Iceland want to outlaw this. It's actually even been mooted here. That would mean that religious Jews or Muslims would have to leave a country or abandon a sacred part of their tradition. You know, I know it's been sold as a human right in Iceland, but for me, it's an aggressive form of secularism. And you know what happens with aggressive secularism? It can become totalitarianism, where the state tells you how to live, what your way of life should be like, how you can bring up your kids. This would subvert a parent's right on what to do with his or her child.
So this is actually the opposite of that. It's not the state telling you how to live your life.
It would be in Iceland if the law had passed.
No, it's not. It's the state asking parents not to force their views on the child until the child's old enough to know.
It's a part.
Now, the thing
I
is,
just
Carol,
said at the start of this, it's a non-negotiable part of the Jewish identity.
Well, let me speak to what I know about, which is the Muslim identity. I'm not going to speak on behalf of Jews, and there are sensitivities around that. But what I will say is that actually, having undergone the procedure, I've had to face a choice recently as to whether I repeat the procedure for my one-year-old child. So I looked into this extensively and felt such a shame, such a stigma and taboo. In my own community, I know that I'll be seen as a traitor for saying what I'm saying now. However, what I found is that removing up to 50% of functioning penile skin that has about 5 of the most sensitive parts of the penis, that without medical grounds, of course, if there are medical reasons, if there is something that's going to go wrong, that's different. But doing that based upon my beliefs, doing that to a child without asking them first, I don't think that I can argue it's religious freedom, because actually it's the child's religious freedom that I should be thinking
But
of, not my preferences.
some people would say you are safeguarding your child's health. Circumcised...
Well, no, there's no evidence.
Well, let me finish. Circumcised boys are 22 times less likely to get penile cancer.
yeah.
It's actually it is known to slow the spread of HIV.
No,
In America, 3/4 of all male babies are
When I say
circumcised on
Carol,
health
look, when I
grounds.
say I looked into it, please trust me that these stats that are thrown around, right, like the HIV...
So you're the only
just-
person who knows
No,
it?
no.
That sounds like
What
what
I'm
you're
saying is,
saying.
like, because it's happened to me and because I was about to do it to my son, I'm saying I took it seriously enough to look at the evidence and the counter studies, right?
When I talked about secularism before turning into totalitarianism, in Iceland, where they're debating this, there are something like 250 Jews and 1,500 Muslims. What do you think that says? Why is it so important in a country that has that? To me, that smacks of totalitarianism.
It's really
Right,
interesting
yeah.
that you're suddenly defending the rights of Muslims.
And
Jews.
also,
Is it? Well, why would it be interesting?
Well,
as I'm married to a Muslim, why would it be that interesting to you?
Because I think ordinarily, when it comes to these sorts of discussions, you're not concerned about their feelings. And I'm saying that actually
I am
this is a
concerned
conversation
about
about
their feelings.
feelings. This is
I
all
am
it is.
concerned about
Let's get young June in.
Yeah, well, because the thing is, it's for me, I come from a culture that circumcises its boys. And so I am torn over this issue in terms of whether or not I think it should be banned in general. Obviously, you cannot compare it to female circumcision, and my culture does not practice FGM. But as I am so against FGM and I'm so against female circumcision, and obviously you don't have the same medical... No, I know, you don't have the same medical
Can't talk about it
implications.
the same breath.
But what I'm saying is that maybe actually what we need to get to is to ban it altogether.
Have you looked at the lighter form of female? Hold on, Carol. Hold on.
Because-
Carol, give us a second.
No, but Carol, why is it that you're so incensed around this, but yet you're against hijabs per se?
Yeah, that's what I meant about
what's
the feelings
difference
comment.
about
You're suddenly
religious
concerned
freedom?
about people's feelings.
Yeah.
Is this not the case? And I'm,
Because that's not written into
Yes,
the,
well, that's
the
because you
Quran.
ask. Of course,
It's an
depends who you ask, Carol.
interpretation.
Of course it is.
Sorry?
It depends who you ask.
we must get Karen in a minute.
interpretation.
Can I just ask? June said something. I just want to ask it on the female side of things, right?
Obviously
the
you can't
lighter
compare
form
the
of
two, I know.
on the lighter form you can, right? So the lighter form of female circumcision
Yes.
involves just removing the tip of
And
the
the
skin
labia, isn't it?
over the
Yeah.
clitoris, the lighter form.
Yeah.
Now, nobody would ever countenance doing that, right? And yet it's actually quite comparable to male circumcision, and that's why when I thought about it, I thought I'm being a hypocrite. That was a nit.
Quick sentence from me, then let's get Karen. Surely the system is working. You can choose to do what you do with your little boy, and I'm sure it will be guided by parental and fatherly wisdom. Good luck to you. So you don't want to do it, but you could even... I think the system works as it is. That's
Well,
all
hold on
I'd
a
say.
minute. What about hold on. What about the adults who it's done too and then grow up and then decide they don't want it done to them?
But they're children,
But
and
they're
they are
when they grow up,
Jewish, or they are
no,
Muslim, or
almost.
they are
So
whatever.
when they grow up, and what if they
He's
didn't
saying
want that
at
procedure
16
done
you
to them
should choose.
What they
when they were babies?
Well,
No one asked them their permission.
Well,
If they
8
grow-
days, you can't. A Jewish, I think it's 8 days.
Yeah,
if
for
it's a
Jews,
Jewish
they
boy.
do.
Jews
Yeah.
it's 8 days. I'm not going to speak on behalf of Jews. That's not my place. Yeah.
The one point that there is no comparison with female genital
At all.
mutilation.
No,
I
of
mean,
course,
that
yeah.
is barbaric,
Yeah.
that is banned, that is
Yeah.
illegal
Of course.
and awful.
Yeah, indeed.
Here we've got something that the medical proof shows that actually there is no great difference
Yep.
between the two. So it's not something that is harming the boy.
Indeed.
There are religious reasons why it's done, which we've discussed with the Jewish community, the Muslim community. There are also cultural in many African communities.
Yes, in my
It
community,
happens at a much older age. There, when they're approaching puberty around 13 years old, tends to be the age that they have to do it. It's very painful. And they do it because of cultural reasons. So you have religious reasons, you have cultural reasons. But in this country, we have free choice as individuals. So if an individual like you, you're a Muslim, but you said, I don't want to do this for my child, you didn't do it.
Yeah.
Now, but other people, through their religious beliefs, feel they have to do it. Now, when you talk about parental control, how many other things do parents control that we had no choice about
And
as
so
children?
this is where I was going to. This is where I was going to correct something, right? So I didn't exercise. This is where I think it's being framed wrong. I didn't exercise my religious freedom to choose not to do it. That's actually not how I think it should be framed. What the choice I made was to allow my child to have their own religious freedom to choose for themselves, rather than impose my views on my child. And that's the correct framing, because what we're doing, unlike choosing which school our child goes to, unlike unlike, for example, dressing our child in a particular way, we're making an irreversible choice to remove up to 50% of the functioning penile skin. When you talk about no harm, yes, there's no illness that results from it, but there is a harm, and that harm has been proven scientifically that we reduce the sensation around the penis, which is the pleasure that the male enjoys from sexual intercourse, because of a choice we've made for the child, and the child didn't have a say in it. That's why the system isn't working at the moment.
We could carry on discussing this for a while, and I'm next after the break, and I'm going to be talking about everyone's favourite topic. Respecting the result of the Brexit referendum means not just leaving the European Union, but the single market and customs union as well. That's what Theresa May has always told us. The first phase of the negotiations made clear that this would create a problem on the Irish border. But the Prime Minister has stuck to her red lines and has chosen to kick the can down the road. On Monday, Jeremy Corbyn announced that the Labour Party wants to remain in a customs union with the European Union. I think he's right. A customs union is essential for business and is the only way to resolve the Northern Ireland situation. But I also think, like many of his supporters, that he needs to go further and back remaining in the single market too. If Jeremy Corbyn can make this happen, he'll be doing this country a true service.
So, Karen, we stay in the customs union, we stay in the single market. What the bloody hell was all that about then nearly 2 years ago? What was it about? What did we vote for then? What have we achieved or attained?
For a mistake.
Just selling everyone out.
See, this is the whole problem with Brexit. When people voted to leave, they didn't say on what basis. Many people assumed that they would be staying in the single market. Many people didn't realize the repercussions of all this, and the complications are so huge. Here we are with a situation.
Karen, have you been a bit presumptuous to decide?
Because I've spoken to people who've said this.
Well, I've spoken to people every day.
And the reality is that the Prime Minister has put these red lines down, where these red lines have continually been put down.
This is based on you speaking to a few people. Is it?
Single market.
No, he's in the House of Lords.
Prime Minister,
Precisely.
Prime Minister's single market, red line and customs union, that we're leaving both. We've boxed ourselves into a corner over here, not least in the Northern Ireland situation.
Yes.
I was in Ireland last
Yes.
month, and they're terrified of the situation that there might be a border again. We cannot have a border. The Good Friday Agreement is far too important.
Yeah.
I mean,
we have to preserve it.
I must allow the people in. I would just say that I wouldn't worry. Boris Johnson has clearly got the border issue solved, although it seems to change by hour to hour.
Camden style.
Britain, fortunately, we don't really go in for revolution or revolting on the streets. I do sense, and come on, Karen, you're an astute bloke. The reason Mr. Corbyn is suddenly, who has voted consistently against Europe and anything European, the reason he's suddenly embracing your line is that he sees a vote coming later this year. He wants to hoover up the dissident Tories, hoover up the Scots Nats, anybody else, and what are there, half a dozen Lib Dems or however many there are on a minibus, get the whole lot of them and bring the government down. That's the reality of it.
The Labour position has been evolving, and Jeremy Corbyn himself has admitted that he voted to remain. Now, he could have done much more during the referendum, and if he'd done much more, we wouldn't be in this position.
In December, Karen, he said quite clearly we were going to come out of the customs union, the single market. But let's just talk about that speech. That was one of the most cynical, calculating, treacherous speeches I have ever heard in my life.
Don't mention words, Carol.
Here was the neo-Marxist, the lifelong anti-capitalist, suddenly getting into bed with the CBI, the bosses' organisation, the capitalist organisation. Frank Field said it. Labour have ratted on 3/4 of their constituents, and with the hugest respect to you, you sit in a bloated, unelected house that wants to thwart Brexit. And I'm just wondering when your pals in there, when Remainer MPs, and when treacherous Whitehall mandarins who speak out against our negotiating.
Don't hold back, Carol.
Let me finish. Who speak out against our negotiating. What you do is you weaken any chance of a deal that we're going to get, you weaken this country and you weaken this government.
You know something, how to go there? You've insulted the House of Lords,
Yes.
which is the guardian of the nation, and
Yes, I haven't.
though we may be.
Yes,
You've
unelected.
called our-
You're thwarting
called our
the
civil
will of the
service,
people.
Our wonderful civil service that is respected around the world for its objectivity and quality.
Oh, please,
Treacherous
really?
mandarins.
Really?
Yes.
Well, June, why don't you...
Really? Sir Mark Donnelly, he's well.
Let's talk
I'm
about
coming
him.
back to him in
Go
a minute.
on then.
Don't worry, Carol. I
Go
got
on.
you on that one.
Wow.
Well, first of all, as you know, I'm not a Corbynista, but I think that Corbyn is completely right on this. And same as you, Karen, I don't think he's gone far enough. I think we need the single market as well as the customs
Because you don't
union.
want Brexit.
No, that's the only way that we safeguard jobs, that we safeguard our economy, that we protect British business, and also that we actually protect the Good Friday Agreement. And then to add to that, actually, Carol, when you look at about whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is being cynical and whether or not this is a calculated move, at the end of the day, 65% of Labour voters are actually pro-EU. So
7 out of 10 constituencies voted to leave. Stop twisting.
And more than 75% of Labour members actually want a second referendum.
Let's just look at this graphic. Now, here we see that outside of the EU is where the majority of growth is. Trade with the EU is becoming less important. So this is why, exactly, we're becoming less reliant on the EU, which is why we have to take back our ability to trade.
So let's just talk about this graphic we've
Yes.
just seen. First of all, it just talks about exports.
Yes.
If we look at overall trade, we are
Yes.
net importers as a country. We're net importer, including from the European Union. Whichever way you look at it, even if our proportion of trade overall with the European Union is
More than
declining,
50%.
it is still 50% of our trade.
Yeah.
10 years down the road, it's going to be more than 40% of our trade. Wait for this. On top of that, nearly 20% of our trade, approaching 20%, is with free trade agreements through the European Union with other countries, including Canada, now Japan.
Yes.
So we have got almost 70% of our trade around the world through a free trade through the European Union and with the European Union.
And we
you
will get it
expect
back.
us
No, we
to
will
give
get
that
it
up
back.
and go after the 30%. Let me just finish. It's a really important one. Go after the 30%, which we may never get. The whole of the Commonwealth, which I'd love to do more trade with, is less than 10% of our trade. Countries like India have free trade agreements with only
Commonwealth
9
have had the
countries.
biggest growth of every
None is a
bloc
Western
over the past
country.
5 years. Karen,
So
you know
to
it.
do free trade deals are not easy. And then here's the other point. Countries that already have free trade agreements with the European Union, like South Korea, have said, you can't just roll over if you leave the European Union and expect us to give the same terms as the European Union. That's 500 million people.
Yeah,
You're
it's a
65 million
different
people.
bloc.
We're going to renegotiate. And
We are.
I've heard this from the horse's mouth, where India is concerned, the EU-India free trade agreement is far more important
That's
to
the
India
priority
than
for
a
them.
UK-India free trade agreement.
I'm like you, June. I'm not a Corbyn supporter. And responding to something that Carol said earlier about this being a calculated move, isn't
It's
all...
dirty politics.
Yeah. Isn't all politics calculated moves? Isn't that the purpose of a politician, to calculate the best move
He was
to
a man of
advance the goals of the
principle,
party?
wasn't he? Yes,
Now,
that's the whole point.
Corbyn, as everyone around this table knows, I really don't like the man. But this decision doesn't go far enough for me either, by the way. But he's demonstrated...
So it doesn't matter who
he's
says it, really,
demonstrated-
does it, as long as
Hold on a
someone says
minute, Carol. Right? He's demonstrated he's grown half a spine. Now, if he grew the other
No, he
half...
hasn't. He's trying to
Hold
be
on a
Prime
minute,
Minister.
right? If he grew the other
And he
half...
will. Get ready for it.
Well, this is what I'm about to say, if I can
Sorry,
actually
I
say it,
should've.
right?
Okay.
Right. If he grew the other half of his spine and actually embraced the single market too, somebody that never thought I could ever bring myself to vote Corbyn may actually consider shaking his hand.
But he's not doing it because he
Right?
believes
No, I
in it.
didn't
He's
say vote
doing
for
it to
him.
get
I'd say-
he's doing it
Come on, what's best for Britain?
He's
Sorry.
doing best for
Sorry.
Britain.
Last thing I'll say is that little graphic you showed us, it said EU and non-EU. Now, as well as what Karan said, which I endorse wholeheartedly, the other part to that graphic is it says EU and non-EU. So the non-EU part is the rest of the world, which is tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of other countries, right? They're not one thing. The non-EU isn't one block, right? So, of course, even if there's a smaller percentage of EU that we're trading with on, what did you say, imports, not exports, not imports, right? Even if that's only 40% and 60% is the rest of the world, the non-EU, that's each individual country we're
But
going
there
to
are
have to
other
negotiate
blocks.
with.
There's the TPP.
No, but that means that, what, 20,
And by the way,
30
no
different
other bloc will
negotiations?
give us what we've got here, which
Yeah.
is the best single market in the world. Free trade
You
of
know what,
movement of
Carol,
people,
Carol,
goods, services and capital. No one else gives it to you.
Karen, can I interrupt quickly? Because, Carol, you mentioned Sir Martin Donnelly, and I have a little gift for you.
Oh, do you?
In
Right, okay,
relation
let's
to
hear
him.
him.
Now, earlier this week, his comments were totally spot on. He said leaving the EU or leaving the single market and customs union was the equivalent of trading a delicious three-course meal, and I think there's some European wine in there, for a packet of crisps.
Yeah.
Even you don't look happy with that.
And that's verging on treachery.
This is the Mandarin you called a treacherous
Yes,
Mandarin.
I think he
Martin
is.
Donnelly, somebody I've actually worked with when he was in the Foreign Office.
A
He's
40-year
high-quality,
civil servant.
high-caliber,
Karen, he
ethical,
worked in the
objective
EU Commission.
civil
No, he
servant.
did not.
Yes, he
And
did.
40
Yes.
years civil
Can I just make a
servant.
He
point?
worked
He
in the
actually-
EU Commission.
No, he did not.
He
He did
also
not.
was Liam Fox's, the Secretary of State for International Trade's permanent secretary.
I say
Here's somebody last
again,
year
he worked
who
in the
said-
EU
Can I
Commission,
just
and he's
make this
probably
point,
had
Carol?
lots of three-course dinners
He knows
courtesy
this
of them.
inside out. He was actually in the Department of International Trade. Here's somebody saying it was like being a fairy godmother if you think you can
And
get the
I
deal
am
that the Prime
going
Minister
to
wants.
interrupt right there.
Dreamland. It's
Karen,
dreamland.
I'm going
We
to
would
stop
never
you
be able
right
to
there.
achieve it.
Because you are watching the play.
Little doubt of that.
It's been a bit heated here. And I'm taking on proposals for more tax after the break. I always thought that life began at 40. Well, according to ex-Deputy PM Damien Green, now extra tax should begin at 40 as well. Mr. Green's reasoning is we should be paying this money to help with the cost of social care, something we'll all need as we're living longer. But as a proud member of the 40 Club, I'm saying sorry, I won't be paying an extra penny in tax. While he has correctly identified a real problem, Mr. Green has neglected other important trends, such as the fact that 40 is the new 20, as your 40s is likely to be the point where you finally get on the housing ladder, and for a growing number of people, start a family. And on top of that, those of us in the 40 and over club are already paying pensions and making contributions. And if we're living longer, we'll probably end up working longer too. So, Mr. Green, to your extra tax, I say no thanks.
Oh, June, it fell upon me to respond to this today. Now, having looked at the panel, and in your case not looked at, but actually just heard from you that you're in your 40s, I have come to the conclusion I'm the youngest here. so I had just turned 40, in fact, in November. I have just joined the 40 Club.
Just joined.
You kind of look like you belong in the 27 Club.
Oh, darling,
But
yes.
still, I think what I'm trying to say is the following, right? I've looked at this issue, and I loathe to defend a Conservative Member of Parliament, and Damien Green in particular. But having considered... Actually, before I tell you what I think, let's hear what he had to say,
Okay.
and I'll tell you how I responded to it. So this is Damien Green, Conservative Member of Parliament. More and more people are going to live to 100. And we must plan for it. It's a tough message, but for the sake of a couple of % on national insurance, you can relieve people of the worry of what may happen at the end of their lives. It will be worth it. Now, look, I don't wholeheartedly endorse that. Here's my confusion, and perhaps the panellists can alleviate this confusion.
What's your confusion?
What do we do with the social care crisis? Whenever we discuss the National Health Service, we all talk about how much we love it, yet the experts are telling us that there's no sense in reforming healthcare if we don't integrate it with social care. And when we have this specific problem of 8% in real terms has been cut from the social care budget, and we have the other specific problem that 18% growth in the over 65s, and in those over 65-year-olds, 45% of them need about $25,000 a year for care. We've got this looming crisis, and I kind of feel sorry for anyone that tries to tackle this, a bit like a poison chalice. So at the same time, we all demand a reformed NHS, and yet when they when they do raise the topic of
Exactly.
extra tax for it, extra cash for it, none of us wants to pay it.
I'm really surprised at your view on this. Because
So was I, actually.
I'm really surprised because I'm pretty sure if you were asked if you'd be prepared to pay more tax for the NHS, you'd probably say yes. And here we have a situation where the most vulnerable people in our society are in danger. You know, there are 2.3 million old people at risk now. They don't have the social care they need, which means, June, they wake up in the morning, they have no one to get them out. No, let me finish. They wake up in the morning, they have no one to get them out of bed. They have no one to take them to the toilet. It is down to any civilised society should be prepared to support its elderly. And I would be glad to pay a couple of % extra.
Because you can afford it, Carol, but not everybody can.
But
There will
it
be
depends on how much you earn.
Hold on a second, hold on, because Damien Green, actually, I quite admire, and I've met him, and I think he's a good bloke. But clearly he's gone out for dinner with Greg Dyke, or he's been taking the Greg Dyke pills, because his solution is just pay more money, pay more money. For some people watching this, that extra, that lofty couple of percent, yeah, if you're making that kind of money and you've got an MP salary and whatever else, yes, that is fine, but not other people.
£884 a year.
If you're 52,000.
And you seem to imply that the government will spend the money so wisely. Cobblers, they won't. Look at some of the money. They can find £1 billion when they want to do a deal with the DUP.
Yeah.
They can find £56 billion for a railway that is highly dubious, HS2. Don't give them any money. Let them spend properly what they've got.
What do we do with the old people who can't get to the toilet on the road?
The point here is the two major points being made. One is, why should this be paid when you reach 40?
Precisely.
Is point number one.
Yeah.
Point number two
Presumption you're earning more.
Well, point number two is the ageing population. This is a huge and growing issue. And we are not catering for it. I mean, there's all this talk of, oh, it's the immigrants and the EU migrants coming into the UK that are a burden on the National Health Service and Care sector. Well, for a start, 130,000 of them work in the National Health sector.
No one's saying that, Karen. This is about people living longer.
The real burden
Bed blocking.
is the ageing population,
Yes, of course.
both in hospitals and in the care sector, and that needs funding.
Yes,
And on the
what
other
do
hand,
we
we're
do?
cutting funding, whereas we actually need to look ahead, and we need to be funding more to cope with the ageing population. There's no running away from that.
What is your solution, Jim?
Well,
agree.
I'm not sure what the solution is.
It doesn't fall to her to have a solution, by the way. She's not a
But
politician.
I don't think penalising people at 40 is it. Because if you look at the growing trends, like I said, actually most people have phenomenal outgoings at 40. You know, that's when you get on the property ladder now. That's when a lot of people starting families like yourself. So actually your outgoings are probably more now than they were
It's
in your
funny because
20s
everything
or
you said
30s.
has actually applied to me
Yes.
since I became... Like, literally, since November, my life has taken an upturn.
Yes, since you became 40.
And also, if you look at our overall government spending, our overall public spending as a country is £800 billion a year.
Good.
And the biggest part of that, is health and social care and welfare. That's a huge chunk of it. So already we're spending a lot. A, we need to do it more efficiently.
But can I-
B,
But
we
this,
probably
don't you think
need to
this is quite
spend
brave
more.
of Damien Green, in the sense that someone has to tackle this issue. No one
But
is
I don't
tackling
know
it.
if this is the way to do it. But
No, I
anyway,
agree.
let's
I agree.
have a look. So the model that Damien Green is basing this on is a scheme that they have in Japan.
Yeah.
And here's a piece that was shot by Katie Stallard-Blanchett, a Sky News reporter. So let's have a look at what she found.
Mrs. Nakamura is 90 years old. Until relatively recently, caring for her would have been solely her children's responsibility. But now she's able to come here during the day instead. 90% of the cost is paid for by the care insurance scheme. The scheme is part funded by the central government, part by compulsory premiums. You start paying into it at the age of 40.
This system isn't perfect, but speaking to people here, I think the consensus is just the difference this scheme makes to their families, giving them somewhere to go so their children can keep going out to work, and stopping them from feeling like a burden in their older age.
Yeah.
Well,
That makes sense.
we've solved it. Mrs. Nakamura has... God bless Mrs. Nakamura.
She's having a
Solved
great
it.
Stop saying it.
You have to take insurance from the age of 40. You take, like, health insurance so that you pay and you're ready to go. We've solved it.
What's
Done.
the difference between
What's
that?
next?
What's the difference between that and tax?
No, but you're paying, and maybe the government match it or something like that.
They say no,
makes
but
more
they are
There's other ways
he's
of
modelling it
doing
on
it.
the Japan model. That's
No, but
precisely
here's-
what
Mrs. Nakamura looks happy.
She looks happy, but here's his
There's a-
Can you stop using any excuse to say her name? Can you just stop it?
So now this is where people will make the accusation you're privatising health.
Yes.
Now maybe a mixed model is the best way ahead, and we might have to look at that. But that's the way this is heading if you look at the Japanese example, and they don't have the National Health Service.
No, they don't, but they also don't have the same social trends as us.
We just saw the Japanese model. Well, there is another model as well, and that's the German fund. Now, the German fund raises, through insurance contributions, money for social care. And what I found amazingly surprising is that they're in an €8.3 billion surplus every year. They're being incredibly responsible. Nick's flicking through that thing.
Yeah, I know.
What the hell is Maggie saying? And it's true.
What are they doing?
An €8.3 billion surplus.
It's like they have a trade surplus. They have surplus and evering.
It's like, how are they doing that?
But is that just because of the efficiency of the system?
Well,
What
the
is
Germans
that?
are generally efficient at everything, aren't they?
Japanese and the Germans. What's going on?
Study that model.
And remind me why I know those two nations.
So when we survey the public, it's surprising that actually most of the public, when you ask them whether they would agree in higher tax for NHS contributions, agree. And actually,
But I think that's different to this.
But actually, I'm arguing you can't separate them because it's impossible to reform the NHS without integrating it with social care.
Also, our proportion of spending on health, we think that 9 approaching 10% of GDP. Other countries spend almost double that. America spends 17, 18%.
But look at what a mess their system is, though.
But we could spend more and have a more efficient system, and I think that's what's required.
Both Labour and Tory, they're warning of this explosion, this time bomb that's going to go off. It's gone off.
Yeah.
We have 2.3 million old people and the worst thing about this, it affects the poor. It affects old people in the most poor and deprived
this is
areas.
Carol arguing for state control.
But no, it is not arguing for state. It's arguing that we pay, that all of us who can pay more. I think that's the point. I would be happy to pay another % or something on my national insurance because I think we owe it to look after our
thank
elderly.
you for Carol. I'm glad to see you're up for paying more tax. That doesn't happen
She's
often
gone out
on
with
this
Greg Dyke as
show.
well now.
Exactly.
An unlikely coupling.
Now it's time for the sort of straight talker of the week. Now, he may not have come away from the Winter Olympics with a medal, but American skier Gus Kenworthy found consolation in taking something else home from South Korea.
Oh.
Gus and partner Matt rescued a puppy called Bimo from a farm in the country, and they condemned the practice of dog eating. Can you believe this? Which they decided was cruel. Now, you might not agree with what they did, but Gus definitely gets our award for the Picture Perfect award of the week. Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure about that, because...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I got into a bit of trouble on the radio the other day, which is nothing you have to say, because I question, I know you, Karen, you love spending the money like this, spending on this, spending that. I think we spent something like £35 million to send our Winter Olympic team over to compete in South Korea. Did any of you watch any of the Winter Olympics? Did any of you race home?
Lots of people did, though.
No, I was asking...
We didn't do as well in the Winter Olympics as we've done in the Paralympics and Olympics, where we came second in the world. I think that's phenomenal. This country is
but
amazing.
it's a lot of money.
When it comes to dogs,
we
we've got
saved
3
the dog.
dogs, and I love dogs, and I'm
I
glad
love
they saved
dogs.
that dog.
I love dogs. And you have got one more chance to say...
What? Mrs. Nakamura?
Yes.
No, I love all that.
And may she live until 100.
Indeed. Everybody
She
phoned
looked
me up
healthy.
and told me that I was being unpatriotic and I wasn't... I just don't think it had the impact.
That's it this week. But don't forget, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter by searching for The Pledge to join in the debate. See you next time.